On today's episode of Propeller Group's Brew Review, we are joined by George Wood, the founder and managing director of the Luna Cinema. Thanks for joining us, George.
No problem.
What are you having to drink?
I'm having a cup of tea. I always start the day with a coffee, and now move on to tea.
What do you read when you're having your morning cuppa?
Usually, last night's Evening Standard. I never quite have time to get all the way through it on the way home, so I bring it in again in the morning. Everyone looks at me like I'm a complete weirdo on the train going, yeah, that's yesterday's news, mate. I'm like, yes, I know, but I'm still catching up on it.
What individual or company do you think is currently stirring things up for the right reasons, and who is in hot water?
Good question. In terms of who's stirring it up for the right reasons, I guess you've got to say Netflix. It feels like we'll look back on this era and talk about, yeah, that's pre-Netflix, that's post-Netflix. The way that they've changed, the way that films, even feature films, are distributed now is completely revolutionary. 5 years ago, none of us could fathom that they would be releasing major feature films. Scorsese's The Irishman this week being a good example, straight to Netflix platform. It's pretty unheard of, and in the industry that I work in, it's really exciting to be seeing how these things are done. So in terms of who's in hot water, where do we begin? I mean, it feels like every week there's a kind of company that you grew up with that you thought would be around forever who's in hot water. So yeah, the list is too long for that one.
What is the one thing you thought was going to make a splash but hasn't?
The one thing I thought would make a splash, I don't know if, 5 years ago, everyone was talking about 3D cinema, and every film that was being made had to be made with a 3D release. It definitely feels to me like people weren't that bothered, and the number of times when people say, you're going to be showing Gravity in 3D, and I say, no, open air cinema, 2D is the only way we can do it. But, trust me, it's amazing. Like, on a big screen, your mind works out how far out in space Sandra Bullock is. So that is a good example where every time I see a film in 3D, I think, actually, it's better without the goggles in 2D. So that's my answer.
What's your favourite tech platform or solution at the moment?
My favourite tech platform, I'm a little bit of a Luddite, I have to admit, but my favourite platform at the moment is an app that I use 5 times a day probably, called the Family app, and it basically is my little boy's at nursery, and the nursery told us when we signed him up that they've got this app that updates you throughout the day of everything he's done, and it's amazing. It literally says, Louis is having a sleep, and then he's awakening, you're always waking now. Tells us when he's had his nappy change and so what he's had for lunch, and it's really good because when I go and pick him up and say, oh, you had soup for lunch, he goes, oh, did you know that, Daddy? It's amazing. So yeah, I get addicted to the Family app.
Thanks for being on a Brew Review, George.
No problem.